Hi guys, welcome back to Chess the Matthew. So on this video, we will tackle about a trap on the Petroff defense. So the set opening start with the moves of e4, e5, and after net f3 and net f6. So here on this position, we shall reach now the Petroff defense. So here the white has a simple trap line against this opening for black, which is the white here will simply play bishop to c4, trying to pressure now the f7 pawn on the board. For example, after bishop c4 and later on with the knight on g5. And here, for example, on this position, this bishop actually doesn't defend the pawn on e4. So the black here can immediately grab that pawn and win material on the board. But here, although the white here can actually tries to recapture that pawn and to pressure down the f7, but for example, the white here can try the move knight c3, trying to develop a piece and also controlling the center and again attacking this knight, and with an intention to intimidate the black here to grab his knight on c3, which is this knight is actually more active than this knight on c3. So here, the black will simply retreat his knight to c5 to escape from the attack of his knight, and again putting his piece, which is actually active, and maintaining it on the board, because on this position, the black here is actually on behind of development because of these sleeping pieces of the black on the board, while the white here has an initiative that actually it is very obvious that the white here has more pieces that actually been developed and ready to attack now the black's king on the board. So here after knight to c5, the white here can now grab the pawn on e5 and again equalize the material on the board. And again after knight takes to e5, it has a very simple threat to grab this pawn with the knight and bishop, because after that knight will grab that pawn, then it can produce a tactical shot, which is the so-called fork technique. So here the black can actually show away the knight by playing f6, and for example, if the knight here will immediately go for his idea, which is to give a fork, but there is a simple queen e7 check, and say for example after king to e1 and again after rook to g8, then again these pieces actually successfully escape from the fork of the knight on f7. So going back, for example, after here f6, the white here should not play the move knight f7, but instead go for a forceful move, which is to play queen to h5, giving a check, because here we shall see in this position now that the only defense here against the check of the white is to cover the check by playing g6 or even to escape from the check. For example, if the black here will simply escape from the check from the queen on h5, but there is a simple move of queen f7, and the only square that the black king here can go is the move d6. But again, there is knight b5 check, and you shall see that again the only move for the black king here is to grab the knight, but after grabbing that knight on e5, there is queen d5 check, and again the only square that the black king can go is the f4, but after f4 there is g3, giving a check again, and we shall see on this position the black here was actually forced to play king to g4, but there is h3, and it's already now a checkmate by the pawn on h3 in just 11 moves. So going back, for example, after queen to h5, giving a check, let's try for example if the black here will cover a check with the move g6. But again, on this position, the black here is still hopeless because there is a move of bishop f7, and trying to force the black king here to go out from his comfort zone by playing king to e7, and again after knight d5, giving a check again with the knight, and the only square he can go is d6, but again there is c4, and again the only square that the king can go is the move c6, but still there is knight b4 check, giving a check again, and we shall see that the black here was actually forced to play his king to the b5 square, but after king b5 there is a4 check, and we shall see on this position now that the king cannot escape from the check on these squares because of this knight and pawn, and again this knight cannot grab that pawn because it was actually pinned down with the queen on h5. So again, the black king here is actually forced to grab that knight on b4 via king takes b4. But again, there is simple c3. And again, the king here was actually forced now to go with the only square, which is king to b3. But after king to b3, it is checkmate now after 13 moves via queen d1 checkmate. Because the king here cannot escape the check, he cannot cover, he cannot grab these checking pieces. So going back one more time after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, knight takes to e4, knight c3, and on this position, the black here will play knight c5, and after knight takes to e5 and f6, everything was actually forced here for black to go for a checkmate after the white here plays queen h5 check. But what is the defense against this trap of white? The trap actually can be defended after, for example, e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6, bishop c4, knight takes e4, knight c3 on this position. The black here should not actually go play the move knight to c5 because of this knight takes to e5. Or again, the black here cannot actually grab that knight easily because there is d takes to c3, and again this pawn was actually undefended, and later on the queen here can play queen to d5 and have a attack on the f7. So if the black here will play d6 to defend that pawn against this knight on f3, but there's simple knight g5, bishop e6 covering the connection of the knight and bishop on the f7, but there is simple bishop takes e6, and after pawn takes e6, here comes now the deadly move for white, which is queen to f3 with dual threat. Again, after queen to f3, it threatens now to capture this pawn and later on the rook, and again plus the knight can actually hop on at f7 to fork the queen and rook. So if the black here will defend the fork on f7 via playing queen to e7, but there is another threat, which is the black cannot actually defend now after queen takes f7, and again later on the white queen here can grab this rook and have a material advantage later on. So after on this position, after knight takes e4, knight c3, the black here should not play knight c5 or even a capture on c3, but instead to play an accurate move, which is to play knight d6, attacking now the bishop and again defending this f7. So after bishop b3, the black here now can push his pawn to a safe square against from the attack of this knight, and again this pawn was actually defended by the knight, so it cannot be captured easily with the knight on c3. So after knight to e5, threatening to have some two attackers to the f7 pawn with his bishop and knight, but again with knight to d6 and king, any capture this pawn will be totally lost for the material of white. So after knight e5, the black here can immediately play queen g5, threatening to capture this pawn on the g2, and again attacking this knight on the e5 with a double attack. So the white here will defend both the pawn and the knight, but there's simple f5 attacking the knight, and after knight to e3, f4, and again we shall see on this position now that the black here has an extra pawn on the board, and later on the black here can immediately develop his piece. For example, b6, bishop b7, knight to f6, and castle on the queen side. And again, the black here has slight advantage rather than, for example, after the move knight takes e4 and knight c3, rather than by playing his knight to c5 or even a capture on the knight takes to c3. So that's all. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please don't forget to subscribe.